Hello, welcome everyone. We are going to dive into a conversation on insulin resistance. So we're going to be talking about reversing insulin resistance with Andrea Nicholson. So you want to learn more about that? If you don't even know what that is, it's probably a good conversation to listen into because you're going to get a lot of insights on a very important thing that really isn't talked about and is really overlooked. And Andrea is going to tell us more about that in just a moment as soon as she gets here. There you go. Hello, Andrea. Welcome, welcome.
Hello, how are you?
I am fantastic. So let me just introduce you a little bit for everyone. I know a lot of people in your community are going to be watching this conversation and then my community as well. So for those of you who don't know who Andrea is, she's a functional health expert and she has a passion and a really unique skill set on investigating and solving complex health issues because her journey actually began as a crime scene investigator and she uses those skills in gathering and analyzing evidence. And now as her transition to functional health investigator, she uses those same skills to help people solve complex health problems, things like digestive issues, fatigue, stubborn weight, hormone imbalances, and we're going to talk about some of that stuff. So welcome, Andrea. Why don't you start off with telling us a little bit more of why that career change and pivot from crime scene investigator to now working with people as a nutritionist in their health?
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me. This is gonna be a lot of fun. These are always so interesting because you just never know where they're gonna go. But
I know.
so yeah, I know that seems like an odd transition to go from crime scene investigator to functional health investigator. But really, I think like most practitioners, especially those of us who came to it later in life, not as our first career, we have our own health journey. And so while I was working that career, I was on my own health journey. And conventional medicine was kind of leaving me stuck. It wasn't really giving me good answers. It was giving me those standard things like eat less, exercise more, eat a heart healthy diet, like really generic advice that I was already following. And yet I was getting sicker and sicker. My advancing heart disease was getting worse. I had plaques forming in my 20s. I had all the wrong lipid profiles. I had just all the things. And all they could really tell me was that generic heart healthy advice. And so I had to put on my own investigator lab coat to really figure out what was going on. And so that's why I credit a lot of that career with giving me those investigative skills and the scientific background to be able to then, pivot to the more nutrition and functional side of things and really figure things out for myself.
That's fantastic. And unfortunately, that's a super common, as you mentioned, that a lot of practitioners in holistic health and functional medicine, it was because they had to figure things out on our own. I remember very clearly one, and I really appreciated my family doctor I had way back when. He's long retired now, but I went to him after, I think it was sometime between my first and second child, and just had stuff going on. And his answer to me was, well, I've been tired since 1979. I'm like, well, if that's your answer to me asking for help, because I know I'm not feeling as well as I should be, then if that's your standard, you're probably not really going to be able to help me for like what I want to do. So kudos for you. So I really want to dive into insulin resistance today because with my background as a pharmacist, we just focused on the blood sugar numbers and waiting until things were, I even think the term pre-diabetes is still like, even by the time someone's labeled pre-diabetic, it's already too far down the path. And I know knowing what you know, so this is why I wanted to dive into it, because I think it's something that once we know a little bit more about it, what we can do about it, we can prevent so many, many things. So start off, can you explain in simple terms what insulin resistance is and maybe why we see it so commonly for women in their 40s and 50s?
Yeah, so just at a super high level, insulin resistance is two present factors together. One is elevated levels of insulin. So they're higher than they should be. The pancreas is creating more insulin than should be necessary, especially in a fasted state. The second category being that the cells of the body are no longer really listening to the presence of that insulin. So you're resistant to it, which means insulin just can't really do its job. And then these two factors feed in on each other. So because the cells aren't listening, the pancreas cranks out even more. The higher levels makes them more resistant. And so they just kind of feed on each other. And the problem is this blocks your ability to burn body fat, which can obviously relate a lot to weight gain and an inability to lose weight, but it also just leaves you hungry and tired and, just lacking energy throughout the day, because that body fat is what sustains us between meals, overnight, all of those things. And when you have those really high levels of insulin, you can't tap into your stored fuels. It literally blocks the other enzymes needed to be able to break down that body fat efficiently for fuel. And that contributes to all of the chronic health issues. So why this happens so much in women in their 40s and 50s, and really all of us as we age, is a lot of different factors. For one, a lot of us don't pay as close of attention to the things we're eating or doing. We get more and more sedentary as we get older. We are more exposed to chemicals and toxins and just all the things as we age. We've been exposed for all of that time. But there's a lot we can do intentionally to turn this stuff around. So part of the problem is we are lacking in the knowledge of what we really should be eating. A lot of what we've been told is wrong. Most of our grocery stores are actually factory made. They're not real food. We're too sedentary. We have office jobs. We sit at our computers all day long. We then come home and we're so tired we just sit in front of the TV. And there's all of these factors contribute to it becoming easier to become more insulin resistant as we age.
And what are some reasons why the pancreas would make more insulin? Like, why is that? Because you specifically mentioned the higher insulin levels in the fasted state. So why would that be happening?
Yeah, generally it's because of those blood sugar levels. So it ultimately does come back to blood sugar as one of the main drivers. There's also stress and lack of sleep and infections and other things that can contribute to it. But the biggest primary cause of high insulin is high blood sugars, because that's one of insulin's main roles, is to take the sugar out of the blood that we get from our food and actually push it into the cells. So insulin's kind of like the key that opens the door that allows glucose out of the blood and into the cell, where it can be used to either be converted directly to energy or to be stored for later use. And so when we're chronically elevating those blood sugars, we're chronically releasing a lot of insulin. And most of us, if we look at what we're eating today, we're eating a lot of really high glycemic, low nutrient foods. And really food-like substances, like we talked about before. Most of these things aren't even real food. Yeah. Your great-grandparents would not have recognized 90% of what's in the grocery store today. And so we have to get back to eating real food. The second part of it is we're also eating way too often. And unfortunately, this is another one of those common pieces of advice that we've all been given that frankly isn't really serving most of us. There are some caveats where people do need to follow that advice of eating frequent meals more often and smaller portions. But for the most part, every time you eat, you're going to get a glucose spike, blood sugar, and you're going to get that insulin spike. So the more often you do that, the more likely you are to stay really high all the time. You just don't have enough time between meals for those levels to come back down, for all of that sugar to be fully processed and stored away or burned before you're eating again. And so that just contributes to both high blood sugars and high insulin levels throughout the day, is this constant, frequent eating.
What are some early signs, maybe some early signs that you as an insulin resistance investigator would pick up that this might be starting to be an issue for somebody? And, like me, maybe I don't even, again, maybe I haven't heard of insulin resistance, so I would have no clue. And I'm going to the doctor, I'm getting my blood work, everything is fine. What are some other signs that me as the individual watching this video, I could start using that to start advocating for myself?
Yeah, the most obvious sign right off the bat, a lot of times, is that extra body weight. Because of those high levels of insulin, it just puts you in a fat storage mode and it blocks that fat burning. So in general, one of the most common reasons for that weight gain is insulin resistance and high levels of insulin. Not always the case, and certainly you don't have to be overweight to have insulin resistance. We have a lot of people who are walking around amongst us at ideal body weight based on all of the common metrics, and yet they actually have really high insulin levels. And so weight is one of the most obvious ones, just because we can all look in the mirror and we can all see it, we know it. But we can also look for things like skin tags. Skin tags are a sign of high insulin, causing the skin to overgrow. Insulin is a growth hormone. So anything that's growing, often there's an insulin component. So whether that be thick patches on your skin, whether that be the dark patches that sometimes you see people have on their necks or in their armpits, skin tags in general are common, but it can also be even things like you get really sleepy after eating, or you get really cranky and shaky and weak and tired if you don't eat frequently. All of those could be signs of hypoglycemia or low blood sugar, but even those low blood sugars are often caused by the preceding high insulin that took your blood sugar too low. So there's all of these kinds of things. Now, unfortunately, you go to your doctor and you say, I'm worried about insulin resistance, and they test your blood sugar and your blood sugar's fine. Well, first of all, there's a lot of problems with that. Number one, what does fine mean? Because there's a broad definition of fine. And a lot of times fine isn't really optimal.
Yes.
And second of all, you can have exceedingly high levels of insulin keeping your blood sugar normal. Well, if they only look at blood sugar, they would never know that underlying problem of really high insulin. So what you want to ask for, and you probably will have to advocate for yourself pretty hard or be willing to pay cash, you'll have to ask for a fasting insulin test. This is where they'll actually measure how much insulin is floating around in your blood when you're not eating anything. So you want to do this fasted, and I would ask for a fasting insulin along with a fasting glucose and a hemoglobin A1C so that you can really see all of the blood sugar metrics together.
Can you just take a moment and explain the difference between that fasted blood sugar and the A1C?
Yeah, so A1C is kind of a calculation of how much of your hemoglobin, which is a part of your red blood cells, has sugar attached to it. And that's an irreversible process, but it's a percentage of how much of your hemoglobin has sugar attached. So just statistically, the more often your red blood cells are exposed to sugar, the more likely they're going to have sugar attached to the hemoglobin. And so if you have either frequently high blood sugars or wildly swinging, where sometimes it's high, sometimes it's low, but you do have high sugars at some times, you'll more likely have sugar attached to your hemoglobin. And so the higher that number gets, the more blood sugar imbalances you've likely had. Now there's other things that go into hemoglobin A1C. You know, how much hemoglobin do you have? What's your iron status? Vitamin D, B vitamins, all kinds of things also play in. So that's why we don't want to just ever take any one marker for face value. We always want to look for patterns amongst multiples. So if your A1C is elevated, but literally everything else on your blood is fine, there's probably something else going on, whether that be some kind of anemia, some kind of vitamin deficiency, something else is going on that's contributing to that. If your insulin is fantastic, your blood sugar is fantastic, you feel great, you're at a good weight, all of those things. So don't ever hyper focus on any just one metric. For the most part, we need to look at all of them in context with others.
Thank you for saying that and clarifying that, because it really is about taking that holistic view. Not, again, these metrics are very, very important, but just one thing doesn't tell the whole story, right? And so HbA1c, what's your ideal? How's that differ from maybe what the standard is? And maybe you can speak to like how those numbers change.
Yeah, so for hemoglobin A1C, I like to see it under 5.3%. That's kind of the ideal range. Now, of course, you can also be too low. So we don't want to be down in the threes. We don't want to be super low. Generally, somewhere in that low fives or potentially even upper fours is fantastic. Conventional medicine will often allow for normal levels to be much higher. So they may go 5.7, 5.8, even up to 6. Even the American Diabetes Association considers someone with type 2 diabetes to be totally normal at 7. They consider that to be really healthy. But we have documented research proof that shows that damage is occurring to the tissue at anything over like 5.6. So 7 being ideal is really tragic, because that's not even in the ballpark of okay, let alone ideal. And so really the lower the better, within reason. We don't want to go too low.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that, like the damage to the tissue that is happening. And someone sent me blood work earlier this week, and it's why, like, because even like the reference ranges change on the blood work. So I've always been like, okay, I want you under 5.5, and the blood work range, again, it'll vary lab to lab. It changes over time. I specifically read it was just like pre-diabetic was considered like 6 to 6.4. And I'm like, so again, at 5.9, you're fine. Okay. But definitely, and that's where the tragedy comes in, that no one is letting you know that, hey, maybe, this is trending in the wrong direction, and maybe it's probably a lot easier to address this when you're at a 5.6 than once you cross that threshold or you're already over at a 6.2. And so how realistic, using the lifestyle factors that you recommend for your clients and nutrition, how realistic, what percentage of drop in A1C, like healthy drop, would you realistically see in like a 3-month period?
There have been some cases of people that drop all the way back into ideal from even full type 2 diabetic range in like less than 90 days. It's really amazing when you buckle down and do the right things, how quickly you can actually turn things around. Now, of course, there's no guarantees in life. There's a lot of factors that go into that. How long have you been sick? What other comorbidities do you have? What medications are you on? Are you physically capable of, exercise and being active? And do you sleep well? And how's your stress load? And, there's so many things that go into it. There's no way to predict, but it has happened very quickly for some people who, did the work, who actually applied all of the things. And those people most likely didn't have all those comorbidities and medications and all the things. But there have been thousands of examples of people who've gotten off medications very quickly for hypertension, for blood sugar, for blood, for, lipids, for all kinds of things. People get off of medications all the time because their body is healing. And so even if that's you and you're like, I've been a diabetic for 20 years and I'm on 25 different medications and I've got all these limitations and all the things, don't lose hope. There's still a lot you can do. Just also be realistic. If you've been a type 2 diabetic with severe disease for 20 years, it's not going to turn around in 2 weeks. It's going to take time, but it is possible to turn it around and at least dramatically improve your health, potentially even fully reversing it.
And feel better every day.
Absolutely.
So what are some top dietary changes that people would start focusing on if they're wanting to reverse their insulin resistance, whether they're just kind of in that warning zone range or full-on insulin resistance? What do you have people do?
Yeah, I think the first thing we've kind of already talked about, which is get back to eating real food. Eat more food that only has one ingredient. Doesn't have anything added to it. Doesn't have anything artificially altered about it. Real food. Start there. I don't care what it is beyond that in that first stage. Get to eating real food first. After that, if you need to, then we can start looking at individual components within the foods and your eating schedule. So if you overeat even super healthy foods, you can still contribute to problems. So even really good foods, we still want to eat the right portions. Now, the good news is most of the time we don't overeat real food because they're so filling. We generally don't, but there are some people who really struggle with appetite sensations and things. And so you still want to be mindful of how much you're eating, but eat real food first. And then after that, if necessary, if your results aren't coming, then we can start to look at those individual macros, the eating schedules, the food combinations, those kinds of things to try to get you the results that are going to get you to where you want to get. For the most part, carbohydrates are what drive blood sugar the most. They break down directly into glucose, so they literally turn directly into blood sugar. But even within carbohydrates, that's a humongous category. That's everything from candy to broccoli and everything in between. So that's still a humongous bucket. So I'm not telling anyone they have to go zero carb. Some people choose to. Some people choose to go full carnivore, and that works fantastically well for some people. Doesn't work for everyone. Mm-hmm. Either preferences or their body, they just don't digest it well, whatever that looks like. So eat real food. That would eliminate the candies and the desserts and all the junk on that end of the spectrum. If you're eating real food that's vegetables, whole, fresh fruits, carbohydrates from like starchy vegetables, your regular vegetables, all of those kinds of things, beans, legumes, nuts, all those kinds of things are going to be far better for you than anything that comes in a package or a box or a smoothie bar, any of these kinds of things. Let's eat real food first. And on that smoothie bar comment, I also recommend you eat your food. As much as I love a good protein shake or a good smoothie, it's really much better in most cases for us to actually eat our food, to chew it, to take time with it, to sense it all, to eat slowly and mindfully. It's very different for your digestion, for your blood sugar management, for all the things when you're drinking your food.
Yes.
There's a time and a place for it when you are really struggling to get enough protein in. I think that can be a great way to add more protein. But I think for the most part, we need to get back to actually sitting down, paying attention, eating real food, and chewing it thoroughly. And then we
thank you
can
for
micromanage beyond
yeah,
that.
and thank you for, I had a sigh of relief when you said, like, just eat real food. Like, that's like how powerful that is, because it can seem daunting, right? If you've been struggling with your health, you've kind of been in this zone for like 5 to 10 years, or maybe you're not like feeling awesome, but you don't have answers, and then things start popping out of whack on blood work. It can seem daunting because you've probably been doing a lot of things to deal with whether it's fatigue or sleep issues or energy. You've probably been doing like things, but the fact that I could feel the truth in that statement of like, just eat real whole foods. Like, oh yeah,
we like
we
to
forget.
overcomplicate things.
Yeah.
So many people are like, I need a meal plan. I need a recipe guide. I need a new cookbook. And it's like, you really don't. You really don't. If you keep it super simple, have a piece of meat and some fresh vegetables, have a salad and some meat. It really doesn't need to be more complicated than that. You don't need a recipe. You can cook a steak. You can cook a chicken breast. You can cook a fillet of fish. You can make a cheeseburger. I don't care what it is. You don't need a recipe for those things.
Yeah.
Just cook up some meat, put some vegetables next to it, especially non-starchy vegetables. Those are going to be your best bet. And you're done. You don't need a complicated meal plan. You don't need a complicated recipe. You don't need 85 ingredients in your cupboard. Meat and vegetables, and you're done. Or eggs and vegetables, or whatever your source of protein is. You do want to have protein with every single meal. So whatever your go-to protein is, do that and put some non-starchy vegetables next to them. If you like them, go for it.
So if someone making this switch and they're going to the whole unprocessed foods, and they're having fruit and they're having the non-starchy carbs in the initial period, talk to me about how long it takes for someone's taste buds to shift, and what can someone do if they're struggling with sugar withdrawals?
Yeah, this is a big one, because a lot of people are like, but I don't like that kind of food, but I don't like it. And give it time. It takes time for your palate to change, for your preferences to change. That's actually the thing I find the hardest for a lot of people, is the things they don't like versus the things they do like. Of course, we all like cookies. Of course, we like ice cream. Of course, we like all the sweet stuff. Of course, we like the chips and the salty things, but it takes time. So just commit to giving it a couple weeks of real whole food where you don't have added sugars, you don't have added sweeteners, you don't have a bunch of artificially processed, ultra processed, sodium and those kinds of things. Give it some time and your palate will change. So even if you try a new food today, maybe there's a vegetable you've never had before, or a particular kind of cooking, you've never had steamed broccoli or whatever, try it. If you don't like it today, keep going, try other things, keep going, stick with whole foods, circle back and try it again in 2 weeks or a month and see if it's different. Also be willing to play with some different cooking styles. Maybe you don't like steamed stuff. Maybe you like it raw. Totally cool. Maybe you like it baked, but not sauteed. Like, be willing to try that. Try different seasonings. Look at the labels, because there's a lot of added junk in seasonings. But, try different methods. Try cooking it up more like a casserole instead of as separate things. Make it as a soup or a stew. There's just so many options that don't have to be difficult. Utilize your kitchen gadgets. Use your slow cooker, use your Instapot, use your air fryer, use your barbecue grill. All of those are going to create different tastes and textures and just all the things. So just kind of be willing to try different things for a while, but your palate can change. So when it comes to sugar addiction or that kind of sugar withdrawal that we feel, it's a real thing. You can literally have physical sensations when you give up sugar, just like you do if you give up alcohol or you give up caffeine or, you know, any of these other addictive substances. You can actually have chemical withdrawal from sugar. Now, not everyone will go through that. It depends a lot on your individual genetics. It depends on how much you were eating. You know, there's a lot of factors that go into this. But I think there's a lot of different strategies that can work for different people. So for some, it might be switching to a natural sugar, like switching to fruit. Instead of just cold turkey, I'm not having any sweet stuff ever again. You know, find a healthier alternative and kind of baby step your way out of it to where you can get very little in your diet. So that would be kind of my best guess. Some people do great with cold turkey, you know, quitting smoking or drinking or, you know, any of those kinds of things. Some people just quit cold turkey and they're fantastic. Other people really do need to kind of taper down and do it smartly. So you know your body. You know if you're a rip the Band-Aid off kind of person or not so much. So, and be willing to try different things. If you fall off and you go right back to your old ways, try a different path next time. Just keep at it.
Amazing. And after that conversation, I'm hungry for dinner. But I rarely notice if I finish my meal with fruit, because that's usually I will. But if I don't, like often it'll be lunch because I'm kind of busy eating in the middle of the day. Later in the middle afternoon, I'll be like, I'm looking for something, and then I'll remember, oh, I didn't have my fruit. So that's just me personally. Some people don't like fruit and don't eat it. Yep. I really enjoy it, and I've really trained myself to like appreciate it and savor it at the end of the meal. So that's something that helps for me. But we haven't talked about this one, and this is a big one. I need to know, what are your thoughts on intermittent fasting, time restricted eating for people who are dealing with insulin resistance?
I think this is another one of those that works really, really well for a lot of people, but it doesn't work for everyone. You know, there's some people who are on certain medications that have to be taken at certain times and have to be taken with food. Clearly, you're going to be limited in what you can do as far as fasting schedules and those kinds of things. There are, you know, other conditions like after gastric bypass and some of those kinds of things where you just have to eat smaller portions at any one time that can make fasting a little bit harder because you just can't take in enough food throughout the day if you're only eating once or twice and you can only eat, you know, a couple bites at a time. So there are some conditions where it doesn't work, but I think for a lot of other people, intentionally adding some fasting in can be really beneficial for calming the food noise, for just helping you not need to think about food 25 times a day or 10 times a day or 5 times a day. If you're eating 2 meals a day, that's only 2 meals you have to plan for. It's only 2 times you have to think about food. It's a lot less cleanup. It can be a lot less food in general. It's a lot less cooking. You know, there's a lot of benefits to it. So it works really well for a lot of people. And counterintuitively, a lot of people end up finding they're less hungry. The less often they eat, the less hungry they are. And I am for sure in that category. I've done a few plans where you intentionally eat, you know, 5 or 6 times a day for a period of time. And I'm ravenous, even though I'm actually eating way more food. But if I eat once or twice a day, I have to remember to eat some days. I'm not that hungry. So I think this is another one of those places where you have to really find that sweet spot for you and what works well for you. I'm a big fan of it, especially at the beginning, fast to the point of comfort. So when it comes naturally and you just like forgot to eat, or you were so busy that you just didn't get around to eating and you feel fine, that's a great way to add fasting because it was easy. It was natural. It wasn't anything you had to force. I am never a fan of white knuckling your way through it, pushing through when you feel ill. You know, I committed to a 48-hour fast, so I'm going to not eat for 2 days, even though you feel like you're going to die. Like, that's not a good way to fast ever. Or fasting to the point where then you end up binging, or you end up going through the drive-through, or, you know, Dairy Queen or whatever, and you end up eating terrible choices at the end of the fast. That is way worse than not ever fasting.
Yeah.
Because you'll literally have dropped your insulin down through the fast, and then you just throw this huge bolus of sugar on top of it. you're causing a tremendous amount of damage doing that. So I would rather you not fast if that's what fasting results in, or I would rather you fast less so that you don't get that to that point. But really find that sweet spot where you can do it comfortably. You can maybe push it just a little bit to get, better at it or do a little bit longer, but don't jump into a 3-day or 5-day fast. Don't do anything that's going to force you to binge eat or lose all control on the back end. Have a plan for how you're going to step out of the fast. Mm-hmm. Have a meal planned, have something gentle and soft and small to start your digestion up again, especially if you've done anything longer than like 18 hours. So, just be really strategic with it. I think there's a lot of great benefits to it when it's done correctly.
Thank you. And I would love to know, what are some of your personal non-negotiable when it comes to health and your daily habits?
For me, it really is a lot of the stuff we've talked about. Eating real food, getting back to being more active, like right now I'm standing at my desk instead of sitting, just little things throughout the day, trying to be mindful about when can I be more active? How can I, carry something heavy? How can I incorporate other things into my life? Eating real food, avoiding certain ingredients. I really do try to avoid seed oils and added sugars and high fructose corn syrup and, those kinds of the worst ingredients, artificial colors and sweeteners. And, we've just seen that the US FDA just blocked red number 3. Like, these are the things we shouldn't be eating anyway. We don't really need the government to tell us that they're not allowed.
It's like not in the apples and the chicken breasts anyway, right? So if you're just eating whole food, you don't even need to worry about, you don't even need to enter that conversation.
Exactly. So yeah, and then, getting good quality sleep every night is really important. That plays a humongous role in your metabolic health and just your mental health and your capability of functioning throughout the day. So yeah, just trying to be mindful throughout all aspects of my life and trying to be as healthy as possible. I'm certainly not perfect. There are lots of things I do on a daily basis that are not ideal, but that's human being. That's being a human and having a real life. But, just being mindful of it, trying to choose wisely whenever I can.
I think you've given us so much great information of like really the full picture of what's going on with the insulin resistance, why it's a block to burning fat, which is ultimately a common complaint or the real issue when women are saying they want to lose weight, they got this thing going on, what's happening. It really is that block to burning fat, and you've explained that really well and gave us a lot of great practical tips for that. How can anyone who's watching this learn more about what you do and connect with you if they need support?
Yeah, well, certainly here we are on Instagram, so that's an easy way to connect with me since here we are. Easy to just click on my profile and follow some of the content that I put out. Links in the bio, all of those things. But yeah, so if you're interested in individual or group care, I'm here to help. I can also help with lab interpretations or even ordering labs if your doctor isn't being supportive of your goals.
Amazing. There's a way. So advocate, if nothing else. Again, there's ways, right? If people aren't, if your regular practitioner won't order those things, there's ways, and people like Andrea can help facilitate that, connect you with the right places to get that done. Because at the end of the day, like I always feel people, you need to know those numbers. Like you need to have that. You need to have a record of it like over time. So that's my like personal ones. Like if you get blood work done, make sure you have a copy. Make sure you have access to it. Yep. So if you go to another practitioner 2 years down the road, like they can see that, right? So from the investigator, like that's kind of the backstory. We want to see how long things have been off track. What's the trend? Yep. That really does give a lot of information to the right person. So thank you for that. And any final piece of advice or takeaway for women struggling and wanting to reverse insulin resistance? What should they do starting today or tomorrow?
Yeah, I'll just tag on to what you just said. I think the biggest thing is be your own advocate. Don't give up. Don't lose hope. Fight, ask questions, do your research, ask around, get other opinions, talk to other people who are on the journey. Don't be afraid to reach out and ask questions of people. And don't be afraid to challenge your doctor. Your doctor can't make you do anything. So if they want to prescribe you a medication that you don't like, if they want to tell you that it's not possible to change something, they can't make you do anything. You are in ultimate control of your own body and your own choices, and you know your body better than anyone else does. So always fight for yourself. Keep researching, keep trying things. Even if it's hard, just keep going. There's answers out there.
I think that's the most wonderful way to wrap up this conversation. So I don't need to add anything further to that. Thank you, Andrea, for your time and connecting. And definitely go ahead and give Andrea a follow over on her profile. I mean, like crime scene investigator turned insulin nutrition investigator. This woman has got your back, and she's definitely going to help and do a great job for you. So thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll be back next time. Have a great day, Andrea.
Thank you so much for having me.
Bye.
Bye.